In the previous lecture, I mentioned that we can import the CDN package and also use the JavaScript files and just host it yourself. So the CDN way is the way that we are doing it ourselves. The other ways that we can see in the documentation is to use Vue.js is through installing it using npm or through the CLI. So the CLI is a command line interface that you can use to interact with Vue.js. And it's very nice because it gives you everything that you need to create your Vue.js app. So basically, if we're using the CLI, it would be something a little bit more closer to using React. And this way would be good for a headless CMS store. So basically, if we wanted to create a completely custom solution for your clients, then you would use something like the NPM or the CLI. For this course, the reason we're using the first two ways is because we want to use as little Vue.js as possible and make this theme very, very quick. And the way we're doing that is, like I said, limiting the amount of Vue.js that we're using and leaving everything else to HTML and Liquid. So now that we got that out of the way, let's go back into our code and actually create an add to cart function using Vue.js. Because right now, as you can see here, I basically removed any functionality from our form. So if we click add to cart, technically nothing should happen. All that's happening is the page is refreshing because we're activating a submit event. So if we go into our cart, the cart is still empty. So in order to do this, we'll be utilizing more Vue.js functionality. So let's go into our documentation now and take a look at what we will be working with. So inside of the documentation, we can click on introduction. And if we scroll down a little bit, this is basically what we did. We have a component and then we are putting in data inside of the component and we are then displaying it in our DOM element. And as you remember, we changed the delimiters for Vue.js because they basically conflicted with the ones that Liquid uses. And since we can't change the Liquid ones, we have to change the Vue.js. And we can actually go back into the code and just remove this one since we're not going to be using that anymore. And we can just leave this empty return statement for our data because we're going to be filling it up with something else. And then we have something called methods. And methods basically allows us to create functions that we will be calling from within our DOM. And as you can see here, that to call a function on click, we use v on click and then the function name. For this course, we're going to be using another package with a CDN, and this one is called Axios. If you've used React in the past, you're probably pretty familiar with Axios. It's basically a way to send HTTP requests. So go ahead and Google Axios CDN. I will also have the CDN attached to this lecture, so you can also paste that into your code. And the whole project is also available on my GitHub. So if you're ever lost, you can always reference the GitHub and you can see the full code there. So let's click on the first link here. And you can just copy this first one. Or again, you can use the one that's in this lecture and both should work fine. And going back into our code, we have to go back into our theme.liquid file. And then just above the Vue.js script, let's paste our Axios script. And the reason we want to paste this above Vue.js is because we want this script to be included first, because Vue.js will actually be using Axios. So we want to make sure that Axios is ready for us to use. Let's save that and go back into our add to cart form. And underneath our data, let's put a comma, and then we'll include methods. And then we will add the add to cart method. And then we'll pass an event inside of it. And inside of the add to cart method, we will type in event dot prevent default And the reason we want to do this is because whenever we click add to cart, we don't want the whole page to refresh. Now let's give it a few spaces and we can create an Axios request. So the Axios request that we're going to be creating is the axios.post. Inside of the axios.post, we're going to give it the URL, which is going to be /cart/add.js. And this is a method that's available from Shopify. And then we'll pass it the data. So we can just give it the name data. And then on the next line, we'll give it a .then method and then pass in a response. And for the response, let's just console log the response just to see what happens there. And then we'll use the catch method to catch any errors that we might receive. All right, so we have our add to cart event created. Now let's go ahead and use the created method by Vue.js to actually grab data for our product as soon as the page loads. And this is definitely a little trick that you won't find pretty much anywhere online right now. So let's add the created. We'll give it a comma there. And now we can do axios.get. And then we'll get from product /, and this one is a little bit weird, but basically we're inserting Liquid into Vue.js inside of our Axios. And the reason that Liquid is available over here is because we're actually inside of a .liquid file. So the trick with Shopify is that you're able to use Liquid pretty much anywhere inside of the page, whether it's in the script tags or in our DOM. And we're gonna grab from product.handle, and at the end, we're gonna add JS. So if you remember, I showed you when we can basically grab from any product and then just type in JS and it will give us data for that product. Well, that's basically what we're doing here as well. So we're making an Axios request to this URL and grabbing all of that data. And so going back into our code, we can just create a .then and we'll give it the results. And for now, we can just console log the results just to see what we can get. So let's refresh. And we can see that we are getting the headers, requests, config, but also the data. And inside of the data, we have everything for the product available to us. And this is very, very useful because now we're actually able to utilize the data and things like the variants. So for now, we're going to do something quick just to make sure that everything works before actually jumping into creating our own custom dropdowns, because this isn't very customer friendly. And what we want to actually build is something more like this, where each variant or each option inside of our variant is easily selectable. So going back into our code, instead of console logging here, we will create a new data variable called variant. And we will just leave this blank for now. And then inside of here, we can type in this .variant equals results .data .variance, and then we'll just use the first one for now. And then just to test that everything works, let's insert the variant value inside of our form and see what we get. As you can see, we got a lot of information, but we actually only need the ID. So at the end here, we'll type in ID. And let's save that and go back. And we can see that only the ID is available to us now, which is exactly what we need. So now inside of our add to cart method, what we need to do is create this data variable that we inserted over here. Now we can do this by saying let data equals ID, and we'll use this dot variant, and then we'll also need to pass the quantity. And for now, we'll just pass quantity 1, and let's hit save. And then inside of our button, let's go ahead and add a click event, and we can do this by typing add click equals add to cart. And the reason we're using add click is because it's the same as v-click, but add click is just a kind of a short notation that we can use. And let's hit save and go back into our website. And then we can click add to cart, and we're getting response not defined. And the reason we're getting response not defined is because I actually made a typo here. So let's save this and go back, and then we can click add to cart again, and there we go. So we're getting a status 200, so basically everything went through. And now if we go into our cart, we should see the item, and there we go. If you see our item, we actually added 2 of them just because the first time the response wasn't found, but it actually went through. So everything's working properly. And we can just reduce the number here just to clear it. The other way to clear it would be just to type in cart clear. And we can just go back into our product page. All right, so basically everything works now, but not the way that we want it to work. So in the next lecture, we're actually going to start building out more of this product page and getting the custom select dropdown to work properly. We're getting into the more difficult topics now, so I hope you're staying with me. If you have any questions, please leave them in the Q&A, and I'll make sure to answer each and every question that you have.